Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this evening presented by the Arts and Humanities Faculty lecture series. I have the enormous pleasure to present to you tonight one of our newest members in the Department of French Studies, Dr. Genevieve de Viveiros. Genevieve came to us in July of 2009, no, 11, after, only 2 years after completing her PhD thesis at the University of Toronto. And in this thesis, she studied adaptations of Émile Zola's novels for the stage. Right? She's interested not only in late 19th century theater, theatrical adaptations, naturalism, Émile Zola, also the reception of these theater pieces by the newspapers of the time, so the influence of newspapers on the cultural life of Paris at the time. And she's also interested in women writers of the same period. She's currently working on a critical edition of one of Émile Zola's novels, La Terre, which is going to be published by the extremely prestigious French publishing house, Garnier, Édition Garnier Classique. And she's got another one in the works as well. Right? Okay. And anybody want to add anything? Okay. So the title of her, so she's going to be talking to us about all of those things, minus the women bit perhaps. Sur la scène, adapting Balzac, Dumas and Zola for the stage. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm extremely delighted to be with you this evening to talk about one aspect of my research concerning theater in France during the 19th century that I find particularly interesting, like Marilyn just mentioned, the question of adaptations. So in the past years, I've looked into adaptations and I've been trying to understand why they became so popular, especially in our contemporary world. The interactions between literature and other genres or media seem to be nowadays so common. We often forget, for instance, that most films are based on books. The Hollywood blockbusters that are performed by our favorite actors are often the result of rewritings and transpositions of our favorite novels. Perhaps you have read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and have seen its screen version too. Perhaps you're awaiting, like me, with great impatience, the premiere of Anna Karenina, based on Tolstoy's novel, which is expected to come out in movie theaters in the days to come. From the constant screen reworks of Jane Austen's novels, to James Bond, Fight Club, Twilight, or Harry Potter, adaptations based on literary works, it seems, are everywhere and exist in various forms. This practice of adapting novels into a different artistic medium can be traced back to the 19th century. It is this particular phenomenon that I would like to examine with you today. The literary landscape of the 19th century is marked indeed by a tremendous production of adaptations, mostly stage adaptations, or plays that were based on novels or short stories. Although some novels were adapted for the stage during the previous centuries, the practice gained a great deal of popularity during this period, especially in Europe, where theater had become the most accessible and important form of entertainment. It is especially true in France, where theater became such a passion that, according to Alfred Delvaux, author of a guide about the French capital entitled Les Plaisirs de Paris, The Pleasures of Paris, published in 1867, Parisians liked theater so much that if they had to choose, they would prefer to pay for a show rather than to pay for bread. Theater is for them a rage, an illness, an infirmity. One could argue that Parisians work, suffer, and live only if they had the chance to enjoy a play. The Parisian audience loves violent emotions. This is to say, the performance that make lots of noise, lots of dust. It is worth mentioning here that attending a play during this period was an immensely popular activity. An account written in 1888 of the social impact of the theater at that time estimated that 500,000 Parisians visited the theater once a week, and that those who went at least once a month numbered between 1 and 1.2 million. As historian Fred Hemmings pointed out in his work about the theater practice in the 19th century, those living in provincial towns were just as stage-struck, supporting the local theaters, as well as traveling up to the capital in ever-increasing numbers to satisfy their craving for the glitter of the footlights and the excitement of a gala performance. By the last third of the century, Paris had become the center of leisure and the theater industry. Due to such high demand, it seems, various types of plays were created and staged during this time, including, of course, adaptations. I would like to discuss tonight why adaptations became so popular and the main reasons that led to the development of such plays in the theatrical repertoire of the time. I'll focus mainly on the adaptations based on the novels of three famous French writers of the 19th century, Honoré de Balzac, Alexandre Dumas père, and Émile Zola. I'll first present a quick survey of the adaptation trend, reflecting on the cultural events that appear to be at the root of this phenomenon, and then I'll proceed to the examination of the reception of this particular type of play in the French press of the 19th century. It must be stressed that theatrical adaptations left no one indifferent in the literary field. At times perceived as a form of plagiarism or as an outrageous merchandising of literature, adaptations provoked heated discussions between literary critics, novelists, and playwrights of the time. The staging of such works gave rise to the publication of a vast number of articles and interviews where questions such as authorship, copyright, and the concept of literature were topics at the heart of many passionate debates. When we look at the entire theatrical repertoire of French plays in the 19th century, it is striking to find that a great number of the most popular plays staged were inspired by novels that were actually published during the same time. Honoré de Balzac was one of the first to report the excessive amount of dramas that based on published fiction narrative stories that were being produced on Parisian stages. Already in 1834, in a letter he addresses to his fellow writers in defense of the establishment of the Société des gens de lettres, which was a writers' association, he expresses the following complaint. As soon as a writer publishes a book, creates characters, invents situations, these characters, this book are taken and become a play. Balzac's assumptions were nothing less than premonitory. This tendency to adapt novels and short stories into plays carried on in the years to follow and seemed to only have decreased at the beginning of the 20th century when film started to acquire the favors of audiences and consideration as a new form of entertainment. Not surprisingly, the growth of the practice of adaptation is linked to the increasing accessibility and popularity of novels among readers during this time. It is important to mention that following the events of the French Revolution, throughout the 19th century, several laws were established to promote literacy among citizens. Studies in the history of literacy in France have shown that throughout the century, there had been a great evolution in reading practices. Mainly, changes were noticed in the number of people who read and also the type of people who indulged in such activity. In 1820, about 40% of the population could sign their names on their marriage contract. That was the way actually we could find out if someone was able to read or write by their signature. And By 1899, about 95% of the French population was considered literate. Women and men from all social classes would have more and more access to printed materials. Now, an increase in the number of readers meant also a greater demand for books, and especially novels. Over these years, the genre will become highly praised by readers. In fact, in 1860, novels constituted already nearly 60% of the books recorded in the French library catalogs. If the novel gains in popularity during that period, it partly owes its success to the outburst of a highly diversified publication network and the introduction of low-priced collection books, allowing the literary material to appear under various forms and in multiple locations, thus attracting a more extended readership. Novels were not only published in a book form, but were also serialized in newspapers and magazines. I'm showing here in this picture of the newspaper Le Siècle. Novels would also appear as small installments every day at the bottom of the newspaper. They were also available in bookstores, train stations, through libraries and circulating libraries. As early as in the 1840s, commentators from both Le Siècle and magazine L'Illustration complained that nowadays you will find anywhere in the banker's hands, as in those of the artisan, in the eyes of the scholar, as in those of the vulgar, the same stories and the same novels. Where formerly the maid only read the old novels of Madame, today it is often Madame that borrows her cook's and her maid's books. Artist Honoré Daumier, in a series of caricatures from 1844, also presented and depicted this phenomenon. In this one, you see the husband with his boots in his hands and what we believe to be his wife, and she's cooking, but at the same time, as you notice, she's also reading a book. And the caption says, "Oh well, here she is, pouring shoe polish instead of milk in my chocolate, damn novel." And according to also critic and writer Théophile Gautier, novels became the preferred genre of contemporary readers. In an article he signs for La Presse in 1848, he mentions, "Nowadays we don't read anything else than novels, especially the ones appearing in newspapers. Following the twists and turns of the novel's plots, the population of Paris holds its breath every day while waiting for the next installment to appear in the next day's paper. People become so hooked up on the story that they simply forget to eat, drink, and sleep." Like I mentioned previously, one of the first 19th century novelists that saw his fiction works adapted to the Parisian stage, at times even without his permission, was Balzac. I know you know him, but born in 1799, Honoré Balzac is the author of a massive series of short stories and novels, collectively entitled La Comédie Humaine, which presents a rich panorama of French life in the first half of the century. Due to his keen observation of detail and unfiltered presentation of society, Balzac is regarded as one of the founders of realism in France. After numerous struggles and attempts to make a name for himself in literature, Balzac succeeded in the 1840s to attract a great deal of readers. A play inspired from his novel Eugénie Grandet was staged in Paris at the Gymnase Dramatique in 1835, shortly after the novel became available to readers. The novel of Eugénie Grandet is set in Saumur and tells the story of Eugénie, who falls in love with her cousin Charles from Paris and her miserly father Félix. The play was written without the permission of Balzac by Paulin and Bayard, two playwrights. Although the play pleased the audience, the fact that it was based on a novel and that it had not been written by Balzac himself was at the source of a heated debate in the press. At the time, plays adapted from novels were often written by both experienced playwrights or inexperienced writers seeking public recognition. The novelist acted as an editor of the work, supervising the transformation of his novel into a drama. On occasions, he also contributed directly to the creation of the play, inventing dialogues, adding and suppressing parts of the storyline, transforming his bestseller into a theatrical piece. The adapters were great victims of the harsh critics of the press against the adaptation practice, at times soliciting more comments in columns than the actual plays being reviewed. Playwrights in charge of creating adaptations were at the source of several accusations. Namely, they were held responsible for the lack of elegance and literary sophistication found in adaptations. Missing elements from the novel in that adaptation plot were attributed to the playwright's lack of vision and talent. Listed as lousy writers, adapters were blamed for ruining the originality of the novel and altering its literary power. Press commentators expressed fierce accusations against adapters and considered them as mere criminals having no respect for the concept of literary property. Since they created plays out of the works of their contemporary novelist fellows, adapters were constantly being accused of being thieves, sometimes even pirates. Although classified as authors of mediocre talent, they were perceived, on the other hand, as experts in the creation of derived products of literature and in being exceptionally skilled in literary recycling practices. This is especially true for Bayard and Paulin, who adapted Eugénie Grandet. An anonymous article published in L'Artiste in 1835 states that the two playwrights were in fact not really writers, but rather thieves that lacked the talent Balzac showed in depicting the characters in his novel. The audience was deprived of the delight of a work of imagination can provide through the development of a thought or a character. Mr. Balzac was robbed by these two playmakers. Another of the most debated and controversial notions relating to theatrical adaptations in the press throughout the 19th century concerned their hybrid generic nature. Due to their narrative origins, adaptations challenged the traditional definition and classification of literary genres, and in consequence were judged by critics as an illegitimate form of theater. Adaptations were commonly denunciated for their odd structure. This aspect is highlighted notably in an article by Jules Janet in Le Journal des Débats of February 7, 1848. While referring to the adaptation of Alexandre Dumas and his collaborator Auguste Maquet of the novel of The Count of Monte Cristo, staged at the Theatre Historique. Perhaps the most famous French writer of the 19th century and still recognized today by the international public, Alexandre Dumas actually first started his career as a playwright, but then his novels, published in newspapers as serials, quickly became extremely successful, and he ended up adapting them for the stage. To this day, the name of Dumas is associated with works such as The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Man with the Iron Mask, and Queen Margot. The Count of Monte Cristo tells the story of Edmond Dantes, who is unjustly accused of being a traitor. After spending several years in prison, he returns to Marseille to take his revenge on his enemies and convince Mercedes that she is his true love. In his review of the adaptation of Monte Cristo, Janet complains that his enjoyment of the play had been restricted by his limited knowledge of the novel's storyline. In his opinion, the transformation of the novel into a play had detrimental consequences over the sequence of actions and the characters of the original work, which, by the way, as you probably know, contains more than 1,000 pages, leaving, of course, spectators in a state of confusion. He says, this play, or rather this novel, turned into a drama, and its metamorphosis gets even more complicated. At times, what we see, what we hear, appears incomplete, and if one doesn't have his book in hand, all meaning is lost. Interesting to note also in the press reception of Dumas' Adaptation at the time is the constant association with gastronomy, food. The fact, in general, that adaptations were created in groups served as another argument of criticism against its authors. Although used not only in theater but for all sorts of literary means, collaboration was perceived as an inadequate artistic creation technique. Press commentators were rigorously opposed to this practice. Associated with industrial processing and factory working methods, collaboration was symbolically linked to the concept of commercialism and was consequently devalued by critics. Commentators set up a polarity between the concepts of individuality, talent, genius versus collaborative work and mass production, thus relegating adaptation at a lower rank of the aesthetic scale. Dumas' use of collaborative practices served as an argument to criticize his works, and often commentators, while condemning his practice, used references to food to comment on his play adapted from Monte Cristo. In La Revue des Deux Mondes, a critic went even as far as to write a poem comparing Dumas' work to a product ready for consumption rather than a literary piece. Jumble without a name, this play created by many, 3, 4, 5, this dish made in haste, this cake from the same mold. Now, Balzac and Dumas were certainly not the only novelists to see their fictional characters coming alive in a theatrical production. Towards the end of the century, the novels of Émile Zola were also adapted to the stage. Born in 1840, Émile Zola is mostly recognized today for his involvement in the defense of Captain Dreyfus, being the author of J'accuse, and novels such as The Assommoir, Nana, and Germinal. Like Balzac, Zola wanted to give a realistic portrait of society in his novels. From 1871 to 1893, he created his most famous novel series, The Rougon-Macquart, a 20-volume collection in which he wanted to depict the society of the Second Empire through the lives of a family named Les Rougon-Macquart. Inspired by scientific theories of his time, Zola, through his philosophy of naturalism, wanted to show society in all its truth. He believed that one's heredity and social environment largely determines one's character. Where realism seeks only to describe subjects as they really are, naturalism also attempts to determine scientifically the underlying forces influencing the actions of its subjects. In his works, Zola exposed the dark harshness of life, exploring themes like poverty, sexuality, violence, disease, and corruption. As a result, he was often criticized for focusing too much on human misery. Most of his novels were at the heart of many literary scandals, and when they were published, as the reality he was trying to depict was often seen as taboo. By the way, if you ever try to read Zola in English, I recommend that you read a recent translation of Zola, as the translations from the 19th century were often censored because we had considered that the English readers would be influenced by the topics depicted by Zola in his novels. And that could be dangerous. From the year 1877 and on, his novels encountered a tremendous success in France, and he became one of the most read novelists of his time. Zola was very interested in reforming the stage and wanted to write plays that would be more realistic. While being fully involved in the writing of his various novel series, he never really relinquished his dream of becoming a successful playwright. Zola contributed directly to the theatrical production of his generation, preferring at times the perspective of the stage to that of the novel to further survey society's foibles and challenge public opinion. It is in 1873, with the theatrical adaptation of the novel Serializations, that the Parisian audiences first came across the name of Zola on a theater bill. In 1879, 1880, 1887, and 1888 followed also several theatrical performances of adaptations of several of his novels, such as L'Assommoir, Nana, Le Ventre de Paris, René, and Germinal. From all these adaptations, L'Assommoir and Nana were without a doubt the adaptations that were the most popular and that created also the most stir in the press. L'Assommoir tells the story of Gervaise Macquart and explores the consequences of alcoholism and the living conditions of the working class in Paris during the Second Empire. The novel quickly became a bestseller and established Zola's fame in France, but also around the world. The adaptation of L'Assommoir was staged at the Biambigu Theatre in Paris in January 19, 1879. Zola wrote the adaptation with the help of playwright William Busnac. What fascinated the critics the most about L'Assommoir was the extreme attention devoted to the staging of the play. The set was found to be tremendously realistic. According to the Figaro, the play is staged in an absolutely remarkable fashion. The decor presents truthfully the environment in which the characters evolve. Indeed, water and real food were used on stage by the actors. I have a couple of posters here that were published after the adaptations, and that also show the different scenes from the play. And as you can all see, someone throwing water in the center, which was one of the most important scenes of the adaptation, and the decor was quite realistic. Here again is the same scene being presented, and another poster showing also the costumes of the actors that were apparently very realistic, and showing also the working class type of clothes. The audience was so impressed by the realism of the adaptation that, according to one commentator, they wished they could also participate in the play themselves, especially in the scene where the characters share a meal. There was a real feast on stage, explains one commentator from the Figaro. A great smell of cooking circulated in the entire room. Spectators who dined early to be there at the beginning of the play, some did not even have dinner at all, regretted that the naturalist school did not manage to share the pieces of the goose that was being cut and eaten on stage with the audience. Inspired by the success of L'Assommoir, the next year Zola and Busnac saw the adaptation of Nana coming to life on the stage of the same theater. Nana is one of Zola's most famous and popular novels. Nana tells the story of Gervaise's daughter, an actress and courtesan in Paris during the Second Empire. The originality of the topic immediately aroused the reader's curiosity, and Nana broke sales records in all of France. On February 14, 1879, when publisher Charpentier released the first edition of the work, it seemed as the whole world, as the journalist Paul Alexis claimed, was immersed in the reading of the adventures of Nana. He says in his article, "A river of paper is flowing. Paris, the provinces, foreign countries are inundated with nanas." The success of Nana on the book market was indeed remarkable. 80,000 copies of the work were sold within the same year, and by comparison, a normal print run at that time would amount to 6,000 volumes. So this is a major success. If we are to believe the following note published in Le Gaulois, the popular madness surrounding Nana reached an even greater level of intensity when the novel was adapted into a play and performed at the Ambigu Theatre in the early days of 1881. For 2 months now, we are only living with Nana and for Nana. The newspaper that we read are full of Nana. The people that we meet only talk about Nana. Everywhere Nana, always Nana, Nana forever. Another critic reported in the same fashion that the news of Nana being transformed into a drama had resulted in a serious health hazard for the Parisian population, as it was the source of a newfound disease called nanism. Nana was performed for the first time on January 29, 1881. The play, written in collaboration again with William Busnack, consisted originally of a 9-act drama. After the first presentation, it was reduced to a 5-act play based on the key parts of the novel. The performance had everything to please and satisfy the audience's taste for detailed scenery and spectacular settings. According to the press notices, the set designers had achieved perfection in terms of stage realism and illusion. The performance featured a real fire and a highly elaborate decor consisting of a beautiful and authentically designed furniture. A natural forest, including a flowing brook, was also recreated. Actors wore sophisticated and fancy costumes, reportedly to have cost a colossal amount of 13,000 francs. Once more, however, critics complained that the adaptation came short of presenting the novel's plot in all its glory. With the exception of Nana's terrifying onstage death at the end of the play and the exhibition of opulent decorative accessories, reviewers found the drama tedious and uninteresting. It's a succession in dialogue form of gossip and news items found in newspapers that specialize in such things and transported onto the stage to produce a series of tableaux that are lively enough and portrayed with plenty of care and expense and framed by charming scenery. There is no play as such. There is a complete lack of interest. The action is nondescript, the characters odious. Some, like the critic Francisque Sarcey, regretted in the play the lack of the novel's originality, complaining that some realistic scenes from the novels had been suppressed. And he was, of course, thinking about a particular scene in the novel where the character of Nana is entirely nude. And he was, of course, expecting to see that on stage. But unfortunately, this did not happen. He wrote in Le Temps, Nana is a vulgar melodrama cleverly extracted from the novel by an expert producer who possesses and employs with a rare skill all the tricks of the trade. The feelings are false, the plot is false, and so is the language. Furthermore, the image of Zola as a writer whose sole interest was making hefty profits was widespread among literary columnists and constituted also a prominent source of criticism established against the novelist. The fact that Zola had not resorted to an original script for the conception of his play seemed to confirm this idea. Several theater reviewers saw the staging of a play inspired by a previously published novel, as well as in Zola's collaboration with Busnack, simply an excuse to generate income. It is only a question of earning money and not a matter of defending literary principles. I think that it will be a great financial success, which is no doubt all that the authors wished for. But I repeat, art has nothing to do with this business. Others made the same point even more bluntly, accusing Zola of perverting the purpose of art and transforming literature into a profit-making undertaking. Critic Henri Fouquier, for instance, compared the novelist to a tradesman and suggested that the staging of Nana was a way for him to find funds to cover the expenses incurred in the renovations to his country house in Medan outside Paris. The play of last night will enrich the author when he submits his balance sheet. He is like a merchant. Wittily and cynically, he will build his castle with 3 wings, on which one the date of one of his 3 payments. I do not mean to blame Mr. Émile Zola's conduct. Everybody has his own way of making his pile. The response of the press to adaptations highlights the distinction operated in the cultural field between cultural capital and economic value. Critics introduce intrinsically in the comments a high versus low art dichotomy. The practice of the adaptations is associated with the form of consumerism, the idea of mass production and reproduction, and therefore is considered as a threat to literature defined, in contrast, as an artistic and solitary endeavor promoting values such as originality and talent. Adaptations cannot be considered as an independent and unique trend in the history of 19th century literature and theater, but rather as a manifestation of what cultural historians have baptized the era of image and the birth of culture of media. Besides this association with image, as we know, is also premonitory. If there is a significant rise in number of plays based on fictional narratives produced on theater stages after the French Revolution, the phenomenon continues to exist in the following centuries. Less commonly found within the realms of theater works, the adaptation tradition persists nonetheless throughout the 20th century, manifesting itself through a new and different medium, cinema. The pictorial descriptions found in novels would be transformed literally into moving pictures. Many parallels can be established between the first film events of the 19th century in France and of the 20th century and the practice of adaptation during the 19th century in France. The great majority of films produced by the production house Pathé in France prior to the First World War took their inspiration from bestseller novels first published during the 19th century. As other researchers have also showed in previous studies, early French movies were mostly based on works by authors such as Honoré de Balzac, Alexandre Dumas, Victor Hugo, Zola, Georges Genet, and Xavier de Montépin. Novels like The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, or Notre-Dame de Paris were at the source of many film plots introduced in the first ever built movie theaters in Paris. Several studies also emphasize the novels of Zola have also contributed to the development of cinema. Along with the novelists mentioned above, Zola was one of the most adapted authors on screen. Between 1898 and so the beginning of cinema and 1960, for instance, we count more than 30 film adaptations based on his works. Still, the permanence and presence of adaptations are traceable in our cultural landscape. By altering and challenging traditional notions of literary genres and aesthetic boundaries, it seems that the practice of adaptation promotes significant paradigms of modern and postmodern cultures. Interesting to note is also how films adapted from novels get similar press today. Often perceived as commercial products, modern adaptations are not less criticized. Despite their popularity, adaptations are usually treated as secondary and almost inevitably regarded as inferior to the original. I will conclude by mentioning this review by Peter Travers of the film of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the adaptation, that appeared in the Rolling Stone magazines in 2011, and that summarizes this fact. Something's missing. I felt it last month when I initially saw the American film version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the first in the best-selling Millennium trilogy by the late Swedish author Stieg Larsson. On second viewing, I still feel a letdown. How could I not? David Fincher, the director of a handful of films I revere, from Fight Club, Seven, Panic Room, and Zodiac, to last year's masterful The Social Network, is at the helm. From him, expectations are high for a transgressive take on the book's search for a serial killer of women. From him, we get what? A faithful adaptation that brings a dazzle but short changes on the daring. Thank you.